Hey, what's up guys? This is going to be a tier list for the game. Before I show you the tier list for all the units, I'm going to show you a tier list for what units should use which traits. If you don't know, these are all the different traits do. We've got Unbound, which is the rarest, Primordial, which is the second rarest. It's basically just an SPA and range boost. We've got Forsaken, which is the crit trait, and we've got Draconic, which is the DOT trait. So if you need to see these again, you can skip back to the start of the video. Now I'm going to show you which traits should be used on which units. Alright, so on your screen you can see the tier list. As you can see at the side, Unbound shows all the units that need Unbound. Primordial is the same, Forsaken is the same, Draconic is the same. So I'll do a quick overview of why each one wants which trait, and then we'll go on to the main units tier list, and I will show you how good each unit is compared to the other units in the game. For Unbound, basically these are all just going to be DPS dealers. Toymaker is not a DPS. This is a summoning unit, and it's a one placement unit, so you kind of need the 0-1 trait to maximize its damage output. Primordial, this is a range and SPA boost, so these are basically just going to be units that want to attack fast for maybe their passive or their support, which is why Salmon Sorcerer is on there. He's a slow unit, so you just want him attacking as fast as he can, and you want him to have as much range as he can. The other two are just DPS. Forsaken is the crit trait. Frieren is good with crit, and Ichigo is a pure crit unit. You need Forsaken on him for him to be as good as he can be. And then Draconic, this is the DOT trait, which could apply to some units that are in other tiers like Choso. He is a bleed unit, so you could use Draconic on him if you want, but he is better with Unbound. But as you can see, Yuta, Ace, and Gabimaru all want Draconic. And now I'll get into the main unit tier list. It's going to be a tier list for Anime Expeditions, the newest tower defense game that's been released. I'm going to be going through the tiers from support until the best units in the game, and explaining why each one gets placed where it is. With no further ado, let's get right into it. To start off, I'll go with farms. The best farm is actually going to be Senku, the epic, and then the legendary farm is right behind. They're both good. But in most game modes, you're probably going to be only using Senku. Maybe if you're playing raids, you could use both because it does get quite expensive, but for the most part, you're going to be using it purely Senku. Okay, moving on from the farms, we're going to start from the worst to the best for each, so we're going to start with the worst support, which is going to be Ice Mage. The reason for this is that he's a slow unit, but there are better slow units, which you'll see in a second, and he's just kind of a worse version of the other slow unit. So if you're early game, he could be good just for slowing down enemies, but once you get a gem summon for mythics, you're probably going to end up replacing this guy. So that's the reason he's the worst support, because he just gets upgraded like pretty soon after you start playing. Our second worst support is going to be Rukia, and this is because she does freeze, which is slightly better than his slow, because his slow isn't very good, but she's the only freeze unit in the game, so she's in here, and that's why she's the second worst. For the third worst, we have Water Princess. She protects your other units in range from debuffs and stuns. She's just a decent support. Now we're on to our fourth worst, or third best, I guess. Going to be Salmon Sorcerer. This is the good slow unit. So he slows up to 85% on enemies. So he's just a lot better than Ice Mage, who does a lot worse. So that's our third best support, actually. And now onto our last two. They're kind of interchangeable. You'll see in a second. So start off with the Forbidden Teacher. She will buff your magical units by 5% per upgrade. I'm sure you can see where this is going, but the hero, which is the interchangeable best support, does the same thing where it buffs 5% per upgrade, but it's for physical units. So if your team has physical units, you would be using the hero. If it's magical units, you'd be using Forbidden Teacher. These are kind of switchable depending on what your team is, but you'll see why the physical is slightly better by the end of this tier list once you see what the best unit is. But they are sort of interchangeable. And that will be it for support. We're going to be moving on now to the C tier. I'll just go through this quickly. These are just like the weak units, as you can guess. So all the rares are in here. They're like some of them are a little bit better than others, but really when you're actually playing, it doesn't really matter which rares you use. They're all pretty weak. And then we've got Janos, quite weak, and Go, he's also weak. And that's the end of C tier. And now we're moving on to B tier, which is a little bit better. We're going to be starting off with the Epic Zoro. He's a bit better than the ones in here, but he's still pretty bad, so he's the weakest in B tier. And then we have Levi, and also the B tier. These are basically units that I would recommend you use. So when you start the game, I'd say these are the ones worth using. The C tier, you probably should never touch these units ever. But B tier, I mean, you could use these guys. I've actually got Uryu in here as well. He's a rare, so if you get Uryu, he's good. You can use him. Now we've got her first legendaries that aren't supports. So we've got this Gachakuta girl. She's going to be the third best in the B tier. And we have Greed, who is their second best. And now for our first limited unit, got the True Saint unit. This is the best B tier unit. This is the starter unit that you get, and it'll help you in the early game. It's a good unit that you should use, but it's not great, which is why it's in B tier. So now we're going to be moving on to A tier, which is where the units will start getting actually decent, and I'll explain what each of them do in this tier because these are actually usable units now. So start off, we've got our worst in A tier, which is the Toymaker unit. Now the way the Toymaker unit works is if you've ever played Anime Crusaders, this is basically Ghetto. If you know, then you'll know know by now what she does, but basically if you don't, she summons based on her damage number. So if she does 1000 damage, the summons will have 1000 HP each, and this can go up to 150% of her damage. So if her damage is 1000, they would be 1500 HP. She kind of needs the 0.1 trait to be good because she purely works off of how much damage she does, but she is a good starter unit. But if you want to actually use her in later stages, you're going to need the 0.1 unit. But yeah, she's the bottom of A tier. Our second worst A tier unit, which is still a good unit, but second worst in the A tier, is going to be Kabimaru. The reason he is down here is because he's not that great on his own, but if you pair him with units that burn, he will increase his DOT damage when he hits a burning enemy, or when that enemy stops burning while they're in his range, his DOT damage will rise. So you need to pair him with burning units if you want it to be good, but he's still good enough to be an A tier. Our third worst unit is going to be Sabo. Has low damage and he costs a lot to place down. He still does good damage because he does constant burns, and he has an ability that creates firewalls which boost him even more. And obviously, as you can probably tell, if you pair these two burn units together, they can both do pretty good damage. So they both make it to the bottom of A tier. Our next unit going to be Choso. So Choso, he causes almost constant bleeding and he marks enemies which will explode and damage other enemies in the range. On top of this, he constantly places down pools which will cause enemies to constantly take damage from him. His ability also greatly boosts his damage output because it constantly hits enemies for slightly reduced damage, but because it's constantly hitting, it still does really good damage. So Choso is actually our third best A tier unit. And now we're going to move on to our second best, which will be Doflamingo. Doflamingo is the second best. He has good DPS and he stuns enemies, allowing your units in his range to do follow-up attacks, boosting everyone else's damage. You could probably say he's a support as well, but he also has good DPS, so he's making it to the second best A tier unit. And to finish off the A tier with our first best, we have Ichigo. So Ichigo, he does have a lower damage stat compared to the other units in the A tier, but the thing with Ichigo is that he is basically just a crit unit, so you're going to want all of his placements and you're going to want them all critting, and you can probably understand why his optimal trait is Forsaken, which is the crit trait, because he constantly buffs his own damage and crit chance, and he reduces his own SPA, and when he uses Mirage Step, he summons a clone of himself, which can also crit. So he basically just wants a lot of placements, a lot of crits, and he's going to be really good. And if you give him equipment, you can get near guaranteed crit for every single attack, and this will be for all of his placements. Ichigo is very good, and he's also our best A tier unit. Now we're going to be moving on to the S tier, which is the best units in the game. To start off, we've got the Puppet. So he just has a high DPS. He also causes enemies to take more damage, and he summons dolls with 150% of his current damage. So all these things put together, just high DPS, he buffs your other units, he spawns his dolls. He is definitely S tier, but he is the bottom of S tier. Now we're going to go into the second bottom of A tier, frieren. Frieren is our second lowest in S tier. Frieren has good DPS, and she also has constant follow-ups, which can deal up to 125% of her damage. You give her the crit trait and crit gear, you can also increase this more and all of her placements. So Frieren is very good, and she is our second worst S tier. So now on to our third worst. We've got the Lady Giant unit. This is a high cost placement unit with good damage, as well as having an ability which increases her damage by 125% at the cost of a higher SPA. You can spam this ability constantly because it's a low cooldown, and the primordial trait and the SPA reducing relics. And if you give her the primordial trait, which decreases her SPA, and then you give her SPA reducing relics, her DPS in giant form can just reach insane numbers. She also does a follow-up every 4 attacks for more damage, which can deal up to 125% of her current damage when she's in giant form. She also summons rock walls in the path, which have 50% of her damage when she's in giant form. So she's a little bit of support, she's a little bit of DPS, and she's very good. So she's going to be our third worst in S tier. And now we're moving on to the top 3 units in the whole entire game. So at number 3, we have the Cursed Student, which is Yuta. He's up here. He just has a good damage. He also has bleed. He summons up to 3 bats per placement, totaling to 9 bats, and they can all be attacking at once, and they also bleed. And if you give him the Draconic trait, which boosts DOT damage, he will just be doing insane damage with the bleed from all of these bats that he brings with him, and all of his placements. And that's our third best unit. So now onto our second best unit. It's actually going to be Megumi. Megumi is our second best unit. He does really good DPS. He has multiple shadows that you can spawn that all copy his trait, giving you just good damage on all of them. And on top of this, his domain pushes back and buffs all magic units in his range. On top of that, he has an ability that will push back enemies and then buff all magic units in his range. So if you pair his magic buff compared with the magic buffer, you could make a pretty good magic team. And then combining those, he just has good support, he has good good buffing potential, he has good DPS, he's just a really good unit all around, and he's going to be our top 2. And I'm sure you probably know by now, our number 1 is going to be Kenpachi. Kenpachi is our number 1 unit, and this is just because he has one of the highest DPS in the whole entire game. He has full AoE and a circle in his range that does constant damage, and when he's paired with an equipment that does crit, you can boost his damage to insane numbers and just get him doing the most DPS in the whole entire game. So that's our number 1. If this tier list helped you, then like, subscribe, comment. If you think any of this is wrong, let me know in the comments, and that's going to be the end of the video. Goodbye.